Hello, and welcome to the Prescribed Word, your spiritual clinic, a place dedicated to your spiritual well being, where a restorative word is always prescribed for your mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Tracy Ann Hunter. If you are new to my podcast, please follow, like, and share, and hit that notification bell so you'll be notified when a new episode becomes available. Today, I want to talk to you on the topic preparation to serve. In last week's episode, we discussed the topic You Are God's Dependent. We examined the various ways in which we are called to serve, the means by which we can recognize our gifts to serve, and the different ways God has prepared those who've gone before us. If you missed it, it is still available on all major streaming platforms for podcasts: Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music with Audible, Apple Music, and iHeartRadio. Let's take a look at St. Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 to 30, where Jesus invites the weary, saying, "Come to me, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." These verses mean submitting to Jesus' gentle guidance and learning from him. Here, God offers true rest and purpose in partnership with him. Not an end to all work, but meaningful spiritual productivity. Now, let's dive a little deeper into this verse. Let's take a look at what a yoke is and the biblical interpretation of it. Yokes have been dated back to prehistoric times, 770 to 440 BC. During this era, yokes were invented primarily for farming. It was a farming tool to harness animals, typically oxen, to pull a plow or a cart. There were also yokes used by humans, mostly slaves, to carry heavy loads. This human yoke was just a simple wooden beam carried across the shoulders with buckets of sap, water, or milk attached to each end. The purpose of this tool was to allow laborers to carry heavy items more effectively. So, in other words, the yoke did not really make the load lighter. It did not make the work easier. In fact, I believe the invention of it caused men to work even harder. Because in the eyes of the masters, the yoke was an invention that would increase productivity. The yoke has always been a metaphoric symbol of burden, servitude, and submission, essentially a binding commitment to an authority. The yoke was first used as a metaphor for the oppression and slavery of the Israelites in Egypt under the tyranny of Pharaoh. You can go ahead and you can read Leviticus chapter 26, how the Lord promised to relieve them of that burden. We also see where the yoke was used as a symbol for submission to foreign kings. The prophet Jeremiah used a physical yoke of wood on his neck to symbolize God's command for Judah and the surrounding nations to submit to the rule of Babylon, which was King Nebuchadnezzar at the time. And you can go ahead and read Jeremiah chapter 27. Also, in 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 4, we see that after the death of Solomon, the people complained to Rehoboam to lighten the harsh servitude of his father and his heavy yoke on them. This was in direct reference to the high taxes they had to pay Solomon. Now, let us journey from the Old Testament to the New Testament. St. Matthew chapter 11, 28, verse 30. Again, we see Jesus inviting people, saying, "Take my yoke upon you, learn from me." And he goes on to say, "For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." This is the most prominent instance of the yoke as a willing submission to divine authority. Here, taking the yoke means becoming a disciple and finding your divine calling by submitting to Christ's authority and teachings. It means accepting your position and serving in the capacity that God places you. Jesus' yoke is way more beneficial in contrast to the heavy yokes imposed by society. Finding your calling takes submission, preparation, and dedication. Once we submit to Christ's divine authority, then we have to prepare ourselves to work. Preparation to serve under Christ's authority will look different for everyone, as all of us were equipped with different gifts to serve in God's kingdom. However, we have to understand that the Lord does take us through moments of training before we are tasked with our divine calling. Let's take a look at a few different ways the Lord can prepare us to serve in His kingdom. Let's look at leadership roles and services. When God has a leadership role for you to play in His kingdom, He trains you for this purpose. Pay attention to all those experiences growing up. Were you chosen for any leadership roles in schools, clubs, or societies? Were you always chosen to lead the group for class projects or, say, projects at work? No, I want you to understand that there's a difference between being chosen for these positions and you volunteering yourself, because the latter is completely different. I'm talking about people choosing you because they see something in you that half of the time we can't see or we've not yet seen in ourselves. Let's look at the Bible character Joseph. Joseph, at a young age, was destined to lead. From the pit to Potiphar's house to prison, he was placed in leadership roles through favor. All of these trainings were learning moments the Lord would have allowed Joseph to experience to propel him eventually to his divine leadership role in the palace. Let's take a look at Moses. Moses was raised in Pharaoh's court, learning all the skills and education to lead, and then spent 40 years in Midian learning humility and patience. All of this was preparation for him to lead Israel out of slavery. Let's also look at David, who was trained through mundane shepherding, musical talent, and facing enemies like Goliath. Through all of these experiences, David developed courage, faith, and resilience on God before becoming king. And Paul, whose obscurity, blindness, and suffering were seen as weaknesses transformed into strength for missionary service. Also, Ruth, her loyalty and willingness to glean and serve Naomi in poverty demonstrated profound love and commitment. leading to provision and lineage. Sometimes what we are experiencing in our lives or what we've experienced as believers is not a mere coincidence or the devil forming weapons that are prospering. They are experiences the Lord is taking us through to prepare us to serve Him. Pay attention to your experiences, reflect on them, and pray for the gift of wisdom and discernment to carefully analyze what the Lord is trying to teach you. When we accept Christ as our Savior, all of our steps are ordered. Your divine calling is perhaps linked to your current successes, your struggles, or perhaps your trials. You must seek God to find your calling. Once you find it, you will see how easy it is to serve in that capacity. Finally, here are some practical reminders for today. When you feel weighed down by life, bring it to Jesus and exchange burdens for rest in Him. Pay attention to the experiences you've had, both triumphs and trials. Ask, what is God teaching me? How could this prepare me to serve others? Seek God's guidance to discover your unique calling and the presence of God's easy yoke in your daily walk. If someone tells you serving God is supposed to feel heavy all the time, pause and revise Jesus' promise. His yoke is easy and His burden is light. Once again, thank you for joining me in this spiritual healing session today. I pray the word you've received feels like a healing balm for your mind, body, and soul. May you step forward with confidence, ready to serve under Christ's gentle authority, knowing His promises are true and sure. See you next time on the prescribed word, where there's always a healing word for your spiritual health.